Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, glad to be back.
We're looking at organizational training and development today.
That's right.
And you sent in some fascinating stuff from a textbook, chapter 13,
Mm-hmm.
specifically about the business side of things.
It's a really important angle, I think.
Absolutely, because you don't want to just throw money at training
Right.
and hope for the best.
Exactly. It needs to be an investment.
So you're really looking at how companies make these decisions about, where to invest their training dollars and how to be smart about it.
Yeah, and how to make sure they're getting a return on that investment.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump into this chapter and see what it says.
Sounds good.
One of the first things I noticed is this idea of direct versus indirect costs.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
It's kind of like an iceberg,
Yeah.
you see the tip.
Exactly. Obvious stuff.
Like if you're renting out a big conference space or flying in some big name speaker.
Those are your direct costs, the easy to see ones. Yeah, but then there's all this stuff lurking beneath the surface. Well, the chapter talks about, what about all the work that those employees aren't doing while they're off at that fancy training?
The indirect costs.
Yeah, and that can really add up.
Oh, absolutely. Companies have to be mindful of that.
So have you seen companies getting creative about how they handle those indirect costs?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some companies are doing things like incorporating training more into the flow of work.
Oh, interesting.
Using these micro-learning platforms that deliver short bursts of training throughout the day.
So it's not taking people away from their desks for hours at a time.
Exactly. Or even leveraging peer-to-peer coaching, where employees are learning from each other.
That's smart.
Right on the job.
Wow.
So it's much more integrated.
That's like sneaking in a workout while you're doing chores.
I like that analogy.
But even with the best cost management strategies, how do companies actually know if training is paying off?
Right.
How do they measure if it's worth the investment?
That's the million-dollar question.
The chapter talks about ROI, but that always sounds kind of intimidating to me.
Yeah, it can sound a bit technical, but it doesn't have to be.
Break it down for us.
Well, think of ROI as a way to compare what you put into training versus what you get out of it.
Okay, so it's like input versus output.
Exactly. And the key is finding a way to measure those benefits in a way that makes sense for your business.
So it's not just about, warm, fuzzy feelings.
No, it's about tangible results.
So, if a training program leads to fewer errors in manufacturing,
That's real cost savings.
or if a sales team closes more deals after a product training.
That's measurable revenue growth.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So it's about seeing those concrete results.
Exactly. You need to be able to demonstrate the impact of the training.
That makes total sense. But what if a company puts all its resources into training,
Okay.
and then they can't afford, new office chairs or something?
That's a great point. And the textbook actually calls this opportunity cost.
Opportunity.
The idea that every dollar you spend on training is a dollar you can't spend somewhere else.
Oh, I see. So it's about priorities.
Exactly. And smart companies don't just look at the ROI of training in isolation. They consider how it fits within their overall budget and strategic goals.
Right. So it's a balancing act.
Absolutely. You have to find that sweet spot.
Now, speaking of balance, the chapter mentions these less tangible benefits of training too.
Oh, yeah.
Things like, improved morale and a better work environment.
The soft skills side of things.
Yeah, and I know you can't really put a dollar figure on that, but it must play some role, right?
Absolutely. While the chapter focuses on the financial aspects of training, it does acknowledge that these soft benefits, things like employee engagement, sense of belonging, even company culture,
Yeah.
those things are often what contribute to long-term success.
It's like they say, happy employees make happy customers.
Exactly. You can have the best product in the world, but if your team isn't motivated or engaged,
It's gonna show. Okay, so we've talked about the different types of costs and the importance of measuring ROI.
right.
But how do companies actually decide how much money to allocate to training each year?
Yeah, how do they create a budget?
Did they just pull a number out of a hat?
Yeah. No. There's a bit more strategy involved than that.
Okay, so tell me, how does it work?
Well, the chapter outlines a few common approaches to budgeting for training and development, and one common method is to use a percentage of the company's total payroll.
Okay.
So the more employees you have, the bigger your training needs,
Makes sense.
and the larger the budget.
So if a company's payroll goes up, their training budget automatically increases too.
Exactly. It's a pretty straightforward approach.
But is there a magic percentage that companies should aim for?
Unfortunately, there isn't a one-size-fits-all number.
Right, of course.
It really depends on the industry, the company's goals, and the types of skills they need to develop.
I can see how that would vary a lot.
Yeah. For example, industries like tech or healthcare. They might allocate a higher percentage because things change so quickly.
Right. They need to keep their skills up to date.
Exactly. Skills can become obsolete pretty fast in those fields.
It's like they're factoring in the shelf life of skills.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
So what are some other approaches?
Well, the chapter also talks about something called zero-based budgeting.
Zero-based budgeting.
And that takes a totally different perspective.
What does that even mean?
Well, instead of just rolling over last year's budget
Uh-huh.
with a few tweaks,
Okay.
they start from scratch each year.
Wow.
Every training program, every dollar spent has to be justified based on the company's current goals.
So it's like every program has to prove its worth.
Exactly. It can be pretty rigorous,
I bet.
but it forces companies to be strategic.
Yeah. You can't just keep funding the same old programs out of habit.
Right. It's about making sure every training dollar is aligned with what the company is trying to achieve.
That's smart. I can see how that would help avoid unnecessary spending.
Definitely, it keeps the focus on the training that really matters.
So once a company has figured out its budget, how do they decide which programs to invest in?
Well, that's where needs analysis comes in.
Needs analysis.
Figuring out the gaps between the skills your employees have and the skills they need.
It's like figuring out the missing pieces of a puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't complete the picture without identifying those gaps.
Right, and how do they do that?
Well, it can involve a variety of methods.
Like what?
Employee surveys, performance reviews, observations, even consultations with managers.
So they're gathering information from a lot of different sources.
Right. It's about getting a holistic view of the skills landscape.
And then once they have that information...
Then they can prioritize the training programs that will have the biggest impact.
So it's not just about randomly picking programs that sound interesting.
No, it's a much more targeted approach.
It sounds like detective work almost.
In a way, it is. You have to gather the clues and piece together the puzzle.
And then once you've identified the programs...
Then you have to estimate the costs.
Right, we talked about direct and indirect costs earlier.
Exactly. But the chapter reminds us that even seemingly small expenses can add up quickly.
It's like those hidden fees on airline tickets.
Exactly. You think you're getting a good deal, and then bam.
Extra charges for everything.
Right. In training, those hidden costs could be things like printing materials, providing refreshments.
Oh, yeah.
Travel expenses, administrative overhead.
I hadn't thought about those.
It's important to factor all of those into the equation.
So you're saying you really have to look at the big picture?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to have a comprehensive understanding of all the costs involved.
Makes sense. So let's say you've got a solid budget, you've identified the training needs, and you've even accounted for those hidden costs.
Okay.
What's next?
Now comes the fun part, choosing the right training delivery methods.
Okay. I'm all ears. I'm always fascinated by new ways to learn.
Well, the chapter highlights that technology is playing an increasingly important role in training.
Of course, e-learning is huge these days. Exactly. You've got e-learning platforms, online courses, virtual workshops.
So many options.
And for good reason, they offer a lot of flexibility and convenience.
I can see why employees can learn at their own pace, on their own schedule.
Exactly. And from a cost perspective, e-learning can be a real game changer.
How so?
Well, you eliminate the need for travel venue rentals, often even printed materials.
That's a lot of savings.
Plus, these platforms often allow companies to track progress, measure engagement, even personalize the learning experience.
It sounds like e-learning is a win-win for both companies and employees.
It can be, but it's not always the best approach.
Right. Some things you just can't learn from a screen.
Exactly. The chapter emphasizes that it's about choosing the right tool for the job.
So sometimes it might be a blended approach.
Right. Combining online modules with in-person workshops or coaching sessions.
It's about finding the right mix.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another cost-saving strategy the chapter highlights.
Okay, I'm listening.
Leveraging internal talent.
You mean like finding experts within the company? Precisely. Instead of always relying on external trainers or consultants.
Right. Why not tap into the knowledge that already exists within your workforce?
Exactly. It's a great way to save money and foster a culture of learning.
It's like turning your employees into knowledge superheroes.
I love that analogy.
But even with the best trainers and the most engaging content, how do you know if the training is actually sticking?
That's where evaluation comes in.
Evaluation.
And the chapter stresses that it's a crucial step.
So it's not enough to just do the training. You have to make sure it's actually making a difference.
Exactly. Evaluation can take many forms, from simple feedback surveys to more complex assessments.
So you're gathering data to see if the training has achieved its objectives.
Right, and whether it's had a positive impact on both employees and the organization.
It sounds like evaluation is really the key to making sure your training investments are paying off.
Absolutely. It's about closing the loop and ensuring that the training is translating into real-world results.
And I imagine the insights you gain from evaluation can help you improve future training programs.
Definitely. You can fine-tune existing programs, identify areas for improvement, make sure your training efforts are always aligned with the needs of your company.
This has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I have a much clearer understanding of how companies can make smart decisions about training investments.
I'm glad to hear that it's a complex field, but with a little bit of knowledge and planning.
You can make sure your training dollars are well spent.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap things up, I'm curious about how companies keep those training costs under control. Are there any secrets to making sure they're getting the most bang for their buck?
Well, no magic formulas, but the chapter talks about something called cost optimization. It's really about being proactive about managing those expenses.
So it's not a one-time thing?
No, it's an ongoing process.
Oh, it's like tending a garden.
Exactly. You have to keep pruning, weeding, fertilizing to make sure things are growing properly.
And how do they do that with training budgets?
One of the key tools is cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, we talked about that earlier.
Right. But the chapter goes deeper. It's not just about doing a one-time calculation. It's about revisiting that analysis regularly.
So you're checking in to see if the training is actually delivering the results.
Exactly. You have to measure the impact and determine if it was worth the investment.
You might find that a program you thought was great isn't really working.
That can happen. Or you might discover a hidden gem that's producing amazing results.
And that's why you need to keep evaluating.
Absolutely. It helps you make informed decisions about where to invest your training dollars.
It's like pruning a rose bush. You have to cut away some branches to help the healthy ones thrive.
I like that analogy.
Now, the chapter also mentions something about eliminating redundancies.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
What does that mean in the context of training?
Well, does it make sense to have multiple departments all creating similar training programs?
Probably not. Sounds like a waste of time and money.
Exactly. Centralizing your training efforts can save a lot of resources.
So it's about coordinating those programs across departments.
Right. Creating a company-wide training calendar, making sure everyone has access to the same resources.
It's like having a central library of training materials.
Exactly. Instead of everyone creating their own little libraries.
That makes a lot more sense.
It not only saves money, but it also ensures consistency in the training.
I've always wondered, how often should companies be training their employees?
That's a great question.
Is more always better?
Not necessarily. The chapter says there's no magic number.
Okay.
It depends on the industry, the roles of the employees, and the rate of change within the company.
So a tech company might need to train more often than a company in a more stable industry.
Exactly. If skills are becoming obsolete quickly, you need to invest in continuous learning.
Makes sense. So what are some approaches to figuring out the right frequency?
Well, one approach that's becoming popular is on-demand learning.
On-demand learning.
It's about providing training just in time when it's needed.
So employees can access training resources whenever they encounter a challenge?
Exactly. It's a very efficient approach.
It's like having a training toolkit at your fingertips.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's the other approach?
The other approach is batch training.
Batch training.
It's about grouping employees together for training sessions.
So you're training a larger group at once.
Exactly. It can be more cost-effective, especially if you're bringing in external trainers.
And it might even have some team-building benefits.
Absolutely. Employees from different departments can learn from each other and build relationships.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered so much about how companies can make smart decisions about training.
From budgeting to cost optimization to choosing the right methods.
I feel like I have a much better grasp on this whole topic.
And I hope you can apply some of these insights to your own work.
Absolutely. And speaking of applying these insights,
Yes.
it's time to shift our focus from the world of organizations to our own personal development.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
We might not be managing big training budgets, but we're all investing in our own growth in some way.
Whether it's taking courses, attending workshops, or reading books.
Exactly. We're always making choices about how to develop ourselves.
So how can we apply these principles to our own learning?
That's the challenge I want to leave you with today.
I love it.
Think about your own learning goals.
Okay.
And how you can maximize your personal ROI.
It's about being intentional with our learning choices and finding ways to grow and develop.
And there you have it, another deep dive successfully completed. We've unpacked a whole chapter about the financial side of training and development, and I hope you've surfaced with some valuable insights that you can apply to your own life. Until next time, keep diving.